Hey Connor, how you doing, man?
Oh, hey Derek. So I'm here today to talk to you about rabies.
All right, let's get into it.
So
Well, you have any questions for me?
first question: what is rabies? Like,
Well, rabies is a single-celled organism that is transmissible through bites or scratches. And basically, rabies looks this is basically rabies shape. It's a bullet or
mm,
kind of pen shape, and they got these little spikes on it, and these help it latch on to other cells, and that helps it get into cells and then self-replicate. It carries its protein in the middle. It's got multiple proteins.
so it's a single-celled
Um,
organism.
Yes, yes,
Oh,
and it has RNA that that replicates with, not DNA, because it
okay.
does not have a nucleus. But basically, rabies is the disease that if you're bitten or scratched, that is the way it is transmitted through people. So uh, in the world, there's around 59,000 cases of rabies every year that people die from.
Mhm.
But only about two of them are in the United States, approximately every year. In countries with less preventive measures, with vaccinated dogs or
Mhm.
cats,
Mhm.
with stray dogs like Brazil or China, many places like that in Asia and
So more
Africa.
rural areas, like.
Yeah, the more undeveloped countries like
Mhm.
Africa and South America often have more stray dogs that will bite people and infect them. That's where you get the majority of the deaths from rabies.
What are some causes of rabies?
So rabies is caused by, as I said, biting and scratching. It's transmitted via saliva. So say like an animal licks its claws or
Mhm.
bites you, it can get its saliva into your flesh, and then its flesh will, or it's the, as shown, those little single-celled parts of rabies will go incubate in your skin. What it does is as shown in this picture, it will latch on to the phosphatidylserine receptors, and then it will create its own little pocket, then penetrate the semi-permeable membrane, in which it will release its DNA inside of your cytoplasm, in which it will self-replicate. And then once it self-replicates, it creates a new one, and then that spreads throughout, and the incubation continues, and it will build up,
Mhm.
and then it will spread throughout your entire body. So it's pretty serious.
Well, what are some
And but
symptoms of these things?
So some symptoms of uh, rabies can include it's severe and there's minor cases. So some minor cases would be like a headache or a fever or dizziness, nausea. Nothing super serious. But in the once it progresses to the more severe stages of the disease, you'll get severe symptoms like hallucination, confusion, strange thoughts. You can get hydrophobia, which is the fear of water, seizures, muscle weakness, spasms, and even like hyperactivity and jumpiness and agitation.
Oh,
There's
jeez.
a lot of neurological problems that go on
Does
because
it
it's
make you
neurological
aggressive
disease.
like it does in animals?
Yes, it can make you very aggressive. It attacks the central nervous system in the brain. It attacks the limbic system, which can throw off all your hormones, your cerebellum. It really messes with the brain.
Mm-hmm. Um, one more question. I know in like you said, rural areas have more rabies system, rabies death. Is it because of the animal like controlment around the area and how they manage them, or is it from disease itself? Is there like a treatment for it?
There is a treatment for rabies. Basically, rabies is a pretty fickle disease. Once you get rabies, it is 100% treatable and curable. Um, but that is before the symptoms show up, and this is a thing called post-exposure prophylaxis, where if you have the symptoms of the disease, it is too late and is most likely fatal. But if you get a shot and a vaccine after you think you may have been bit by an animal with rabies, it can save your life. That is post-exposure prophylaxis, which means just before the symptoms but after exposure.
What's
So
I was wondering what the general prognosis for rabies would be.
the general prognosis generally, as I said, if you are vaccinated before the symptoms occur, then you are very likely to survive with only very minor symptoms, and you'll be fine. But if you have symptoms that show up and you try to get vaccinated or try and do anything, it is almost always fatal. It has been
Jeez.
showed a couple times that some people have recovered after suffering rabies, but is incredibly rare and highly unlikely. It's only happened a couple of times. So if you don't get vaccinated before symptoms, you will die.
Yeah. I heard somewhere that rabies is similar to other diseases with general stages, and as they progressive, they get worse. Is that correct?
Yeah, so rabies does actually have about 5 stages, and the first stage is actually incubation. And in the incubation of rabies, as I said, it will bite you, and then the rabies will go in and it will penetrate your muscle cells, and it will self-replicate in your cells and spread throughout your cells. And then once the incubation period can last up to 2 years, but generally is only 1 to 3 months. It's never really long, but can last a very long time. And that's the part about getting vaccinated. You don't know if you have it. It's a very fickle thing. The second stage is the prodrome phase, which is where the rabies starts to break out and spread throughout your body, infecting cells as it goes. And this is where it will start to cause symptoms like headache, dizziness, drowsiness. Very minor symptoms, but stuff that will infinitely lead to death. I mean, this is where it starts to go for the spinal cord and then the brain. The third phase is that's the acute neurological period, and that's where in your brain it starts attacking your cerebellum
Mm-hmm.
and your brainstem, and that's when you start getting the agitation and the aggressiveness and the hydrophobia, hyperventilation, hyper salivation. That's when you start salivating a lot. It's very aggressive, and this is where you start hallucinating, and this is generally where people are seen to go rabid or
Oh, okay.
crazy. That's where rabies comes from, is they go crazy because it messes with your head and your limbic system.
Mm-hmm. Is there not a lot of time in between when you first get symptoms and those aggressive symptoms start?
Well, generally, the incubation period, as I said, it's a lengthy thing. It can be anywhere from 10 days, which is less than 2 weeks,
Yeah.
to 2 years. So it's really a guess and check kind of thing. You always want to try and get vaccinated after a bite because you don't know if you're gonna die. It's
So
it's a
it's
very serious
quick
thing.
symptoms and straight to agitation. And what's after that?
Yeah, yeah, and then after that you get a coma,
Jeez.
which coma can generally last anywhere from a month to two, and then
Mhm.
death. And then very rarely it's been seen that people have recovered, but there's only a couple documented cases, but it's very unlikely, and there's just a high probability of death. It's
Um,
fatal.
saying what you said earlier, how rabies go up to the spinal cord and affect your brain. Um,
Mhm.
I'm assuming that people who woke up must have like really bad brain damage.
Yeah, basically, rabies infects the brain and replicates inside the brain and starts attacking parts of the brain, like as I said, the cerebellum and the brainstem. This is where it attacks it. In the limbic system, it releases hormones and it causes you to salivate more, and it messes with fine muscle movement in the cerebellum. Well, that's where you start seeing the muscle movements, where you just start spasming, and that's the agitation and the increased paranoia and the rapidity of it.
Mhm.
Uh, that's when it's fatal. Is when it's in your brain. That's you're gonna die. And the only way to tell in an animal if you want to know if it has rabies or not, say your pet, you may think your pet has rabies, is you have to kill the pet. You have to
Really?
euthanize the animal, and then yeah, and then you have to cut open the brain, and you have to look inside the cerebellum
So
or any
once it
parts of the
gets
brain.
rabies, is it just like gone for
Well,
an
it's
animal?
either yeah, you see the animal gets rabies and dies, or you see if it had rabies and dies. I mean,
Do you know if
it's a really
animals
messed up
get
thing.
treated early for it? Like that's why they get shots.
Yeah, yeah. Generally, in places like the United States, a lot of Europe, Canada, animals will get vaccinated. Fun fact, actually, is that generally cats in more developed countries more often have rabies than dogs because dogs are expected to get it more often, so they're vaccinated more often. So cats actually end up getting it more often.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and but granted, any kind of animal can get rabies.
Oh yes.
The raccoon, a skunk, squirrels. Anything that can bite and has saliva that can transmit it to open wound or any mucous membranes in your eyes or mouth or anything.
Yeah. Is it
It can
mostly the
kill you.
rodent species or kind of population has it?
There's it's it's not rodent based. It's generally mammalian, such as anything mammal based. I
Hmm.
mean, monkeys can get it. Really,
Yeah.
anything that's a mammal.
Hmm.
Yeah, but that's basically rabies.